when people think about their preconceptions of fairies, they usually jump to images of Tinkerbell or the
Hmm.
Tooth Fairy. And usually the first thing that comes to my mind is some cute, benevolent, magical humanoid that can grant wishes. My first experience was, the Tooth Fairy, like I see most of you was was with. I heard about it from school when I was, I think, like 6 or something, and I was so excited because I was so excited when the tooth fell out because if I could watch the Tooth Fairy do it in the act, I could prove the existence of magic, and that really excited me as a kid. Unfortunately, I woke up and I saw nothing was there, and I cried. And then my mom gave me a $5 bill, which was also equally as valuable to me at the time. But today, I want to talk about fairies for a little bit, and this concept's been interesting to me for a while because I feel like there's a lot under the surface that people might not know about. People might think it's all happy-go-lucky leprechauns and goblins and all that fantastical stuff, but I think if you look a bit deeper, there's some sinister stuff and some interesting things that you'll find. But Moyer, what's your first conception of a fairy?
It's funny that you say you got $5 when you were younger. That's not bad for the time. I
I
I
know,
got
right?
$1 or $2 from the Tooth Fairy. So you were living it up. You had a generous Tooth Fairy of a mother at that point. So yeah, it's funny. One of my general impressions from them, and I kind of like how there's a thread that goes through the consciousness of humanity where we're kind of aware of these things as we grow up or when we're younger and when we first learn about them, but we don't really think about the origins much. So we hear about the Tooth Fairy. We don't think hard about what a fairy is, what a fae is, maybe what their origins are. Do they come from Grimm's fairy tales? Is there a malevolent origin to them? You have no idea. So it's fun when you look into this stuff and you can't help but think, where does it come from? And we
It's
talk
true.
about this about gray aliens from time to time too. It's like, wait, so where did someone first think of the idea of this is what they're supposed to look like? So when you talk about fairies, vampires, werewolves, any type of mystical entity, it all started from somewhere, and at some point it did find itself into the human subconscious, whether through reality or not, through a dreamlike world that you can't comprehend as a human. It could be any of the above, right? So I think it's interesting when you say Tinkerbell. Is that the one from Peter Pan?
It is, and
Yeah.
go along the same lines. You know, I don't know why this comes out as a surprise, but it really is surprising once you go and research stuff about fairies and all this stuff. But you realize how much of our perception really just comes from Disney and early cartoons.
Yeah.
I mean, it really shouldn't surprise us, but yeah, there. No wonder, like, we think like they're just these magical, like, wow, like happy-go-lucky machines, right? But the origin, it's much more substantial and there's much more meat to it, and I
I
think
like
you'll,
that.
yeah, you know,
I can't wait to get into that. It's funny because Disney has become instinctual to a young kid. By the time they're 3 or 4, they don't know why, but they want to go to Disney World.
yeah.
It's almost like in the same way a bee knows to collect pollen and serve its queen. A kid knows that it wants to go to Disney. It's become human instinct that's ingrained in us genetically at this point. So the thing I was saying about Tinkerbell that I thought was interesting is that there's a reciprocal human aspect to her, is that she was in love with Peter Pan, but she knew that love could never be properly expressed because she's a fairy and he's a human being. And that's before you get to the biological incompatibility of it, but also the world and life and experiences that she lives. It's in a, I don't want to say a time zone. It's completely, it's a magical realm, really, that can never truly mesh with what being human is, the secular world that we live in. So I'm going to go through some common characteristics of fairies. Just we'll get the bare bones, okay? You're now entering fairy school here. And this will probably be in line with what people generally think about, what their known impressions are of a fairy. So is this here? Fairies, often spelled fairies, Fairies, are mythical beings found in the folklore of many cultures, particularly in European traditions. Supernatural creatures with magical powers, often depicted as small, ethereal, and winged. So, or winged, however you want to say that. But common characteristics of fairies: small, delicate beings with wings. We've certainly seen that. Maybe they have some more like artful wings with cool patterns on them. I guess they have four, and they're really fluttering. I don't know. I haven't seen one in real life yet. Or
I think you're thinking of Disney.
Really? Okay. Oh yeah. Here it goes. Yeah. Maybe. Oh yeah. It says they can also appear as full-size humans or even shapeshift into animals or other forms. Okay. So, it could get a little more of a guttural appearance. You know, something a little more animalistic, I guess, when you're thinking about that, biological. It says fairies possess a wide range of magical abilities: power to fly, invisibility, shape shifting. That's interesting, and influencing nature. Okay, so I like this part. It says personality: fairies can be benevolent, mischievous, or downright malevolent. So that's I didn't know they could be bad. Okay, maybe they're like tricksters. They can be like jester types. Their behavior
they
is
can just be
unpredictable.
like downright just angry, just like mean drunks, you know.
Okay. And it says their living trunks. Their living space is enchanted realms hidden from the human eye, mounds, forests, lakes, or even the other world. I kind of like how it's nondescript. It's a little bit ephemeral. It's nebulous. It's just like this area that you just can't quite see and can't comprehend that they can move in and out of. It's so whimsical, right? But then when you add the extra elements that we'll probably talk about,
restricted knowledge. It's like a place that humans aren't supposed to know about, you know?
So it says they're said to inhabit places the natural world fears particularly mysterious or magical. So I think that kind of plays into European mythology with forests, right? Talk about stories like
or swamps, you know.
Yes, Faust, or sure. Maybe where they need some mysticism to get through their daily life to stay hopeful. It's just relationship with humans, gifts and curses. They interact with humans by offering gifts or bestowing curses. Okay, might show them respect or follow the rules. That can all. It seems like kind of fairies can float in and out, kind of drop wisdom pearls or be altruistic towards humans, only to turn around and maybe even do the opposite. I think that's the luxury that they're afforded by being able to kind of move in and out of our sphere. I don't know if you would say reality or physical area. All of the above. So there's many superstitions surround fairies. The belief that you should never step into a fairy ring, a circle of mushrooms, okay? And leaving out food or drink might appease them. It's Santa Claus a fairy? You leave out cookies for iron, salt, and certain herbs are thought. Okay, so we're getting into the kind of alchemic aspects of mysticism and superstition that are always super interesting to me. And that probably comes from a lot of origins of when they were first pontificated whenever in European history. So that's good bare bones there about, and it kind of like opens up the door to be like, okay, well maybe they're not exactly what you think about, you know, Disney fairies or the Tooth Fairy, for instance. But it says here there's types of fairies, which
That's
I didn't
true.
know. Do you know anything about that?
You mentioned that, you know, it comes from a range of different cultures, sort of like all these different cultures in Europe. At the same time, they conceive these notions of fairies, and along with that comes with different types of conceptions of fairies. And I've chosen 3 of the most mysterious ones to talk about. You know, I think we've all heard enough about the leprechauns and the goblins and all this stuff. Save this stuff for Tolkien and the like. I want to talk about the Seed, Sidhe. And the Seed are perhaps the most mysterious of all fairies, largely because they are deeply connected to the ancient Celtic gods and the otherworld. Their origins are shrouded in myth, and they are often seen as powerful, almost godlike beings who exist in a parallel dimension. The Seed are known to live in fairy mounds or hidden places, which are believed to be entrances to their world. And if you interact with them, the interactions are fraught with danger and the unknown, as they can bless or curse humans depending on their whims. And, you know, the Seed tend to have sort of like an enigmatic nature. Their motives are unclear, and they operate on their own set of rules, which humans can barely understand. And they're protected, but also vengeful. and their connection to the ancient forgotten lore adds to their mystique. One parable I like to bring up is when you're interacting with the seed or a fairy like that. You're sort of like a chicken that wanders into a frat house. As strange as that sounds, but think about what that means though, because if you play out the scenario in your head, there's a frat house. There's a party going on. A chicken wanders in. Everyone's like, "Yo, there's a chicken," and then they party with it. They give it food. They have a good time. The chicken doesn't know what's going on, but they're like, "Oh, I just stumbled upon this area full of beings, and they're just giving me food." But on the flip side, it also doesn't know that, wow, these people like mass murder my people for food. But that's it's sort of like a nature of these people that the chicken could never know about, and that's sort of where we are with the seed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it does make complete sense, because again, as you read more about this, you realize where popular culture takes inspiration from all of it is that in True Blood, you find out, spoilers for anyone who hasn't watched a 15-year-old show, you find the main girl, I forget her name, Sookie Stackhouse, how can I forget? You find out that vampires are so attracted to her because she is a fairy, or she at least has fairy blood within her, or a fae, and she meets other fairies, and she comes across, it's like a circus tent that they live in. But the fairies, they're not happy-go-lucky. They're strange. They take advantage of people. They're arrogant. And this is what you're saying, this type of fairy, the Sidhe, the side, reminds me of. So yeah, some representations of them are a lot more honest than others in popular culture. So yeah, I mean that makes sense, and I've definitely seen that before. So any other ones besides
the
those?
Second one is, this one reminds me of The Witcher 3 for some reason, but it's called The Will of the Wisps, and they're ghostly lights that appear in marshes, bogs, or remote areas, and they lead travelers astray. So maybe that's why, because I traveled through a bog in Witcher 3 and saw some ghost NPC or something. But the true nature of these lights is a mystery, with explanations ranging from spirits to the dead to mischievous fairies. And they're often seen as omens of death or misfortune. And if you see one, your time might be ticking down. And combine that with the disappearances of people after they see one, adds to their aura of death, so to speak. But the phenomenon of the exactly, yeah, the phenomenon of these fairies, though, the will of the wisps, they're unpredictable, and they're often associated with places that evoke fear and uncertainty. The lights know for their ability to lure people off the safe path, and those who follow them may never be seen again. So off the bat, this paints the picture of me in ancient medieval times. I'm traveling down the road at nighttime, and I see a glimmer of gold along the side of the road. I'm like, "Oh, did I just hit friggin' payday?" I'm just gonna go off the side of the road for a little dig, and then my party never sees me again.
It's almost like they're the siren of the woods,
exactly,
leading you astray. I like this idea of them, though, being something, I don't want to say less human, but maybe, I don't want to use the term uncanny valley either, but because they're more sprites, you know what I mean? I like when it's like something undefinable, like a light that you attribute certain values of a fae to. It's a little more mysterious, instead of just, hi, I am a fairy in the woods. Like, what if you went and did this? It's just, no.
Wow,
it's
you find my pot of gold, I grant you a wish.
Yeah, so it's more indescribable. It's a little more mysterious, and I like it. It's artful. It's, you think about an old, like, European fairy tale, literally, in this sense, and it says, like, he's wandering along the path, and he sees, like, this bright light that kind of, like, bobs as if it's has its own consciousness, like, through the woods, and you can't help but be entranced by it and follow it. You know what I mean? So that's cool. I think that's pretty interesting. So
the last one, and perhaps the most nefarious of them all, is the changeling. So the changeling, the concept of changeling is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of fairy folklore. You know,
Mm-hmm.
changelings are believed to be fairy children left in place of human babies that have been stolen by the Fae. So the reasons for these abductions are never fully explained. One day, the Fae come across a house, maybe a uh, well lit but unprotected house. They see a baby in the cot. They steal the cot. I mean, they steal the baby from the cot, and then they replace it with one of their sick Fae children, which are the same size as the baby, and the mother never has a word of it. And they never know. Um, but these changelings are deeply rooted in old superstitious practices that pop up quite often in European cultures. The idea that a seemingly normal child could be something from the other world, you know, adds a layer of fear around them, and I think
Mm.
it's a good mechanism to keep parents back then, you know, like protective of your kid. You know, it's like I don't want my kid to get stolen by the face. So I got to keep an eye on them, and you know, maybe that would have prevented them from dying of the cold back then. But yeah, the
Mm.
changelings, they're often associated with illness, deformity, or strange behavior, and the idea that, you know, they can only be exposed through dangerous or magical methods, you know, contributes to their dark reputation. Because, you know, what if people associate like the seed or the will of the wisp with evil and malevolence? What if my kid grows up to be one of them? You know, what if they become like the Omen, or the kid from the Omen? You know.
You know, I do. Hmm. How to say this? So, a lot of the ways, especially through European folklore, it's man trying to understand parts of himself. Okay, so
Yep.
they're using unconscious myth through time to explain what's happening to them in their lives. And this unconscious myth is something, like I was saying, almost passes along genealogically or just through the, I don't want to say the Akashic field, but we'll just say the fabric that permeates being a human being. So when you hear recurring stories like this about, you know, what if my child is the seed of Satan? What if my child is a fairy? What if it's this or that? This is human beings coming to terms. And I'm not saying there's a very human explanation for fairies. We're fanciful here, okay? We love the paranormal. I'm not sure if I completely believe in them either, but I do think they're awesome pieces of myth. This seems like it's humans trying to come to terms with parts of their own children and child rearing that they don't quite understand, and trying to make sense of it. So having a nursery rhyme or a riddle or a myth about your child potentially being some sort of an undercover fairy, we'll
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
is just another way of dealing with child rearing and parts of them that you may not understand, or parts of it that you've not
That's a
quite
good
come to
point.
terms with.
It's like a mom has to come. If a mom has like a really like bad kid that gets
What's
all these,
postpartum depression too?
yeah,
Something to
if a
think
mom
about
has
too.
like a bad kid that does all these crimes, she can wipe it off with things and say, well, you know, he's part fairy, so that what do you expect?
maybe maybe that's a good explanation. I'm sure there's a fine psychological one for why middle children are the way they are. Maybe they're just intercepted fairy children, so they're just a little bit erratic. It could be that. So no, that's incredibly interesting. I'm gonna jump into, because I was talking about it, just myths that are pervasive with fairies, and I do think some of these are pretty interesting. It says the first point here is never eat fairy food. I didn't know that was an option. So the
Mm.
belief that one should never eat or drink anything offered by fairies, I didn't know that. I didn't know there was a fairy buffet. Stems from the idea, which, by the way, I think is something that comes out of, it's not from True Blood. I'm sure they borrowed it from something else historically, but that is something else in there. They're eating something like a manna from heaven. It's the same way. It's this otherworldly concept of, it almost reminds me of the scene from Hook, where they use their imagination to see like potfuls of like this colorful food that looks really good. I think about it this way: Hook is Peter Pan, Tinkerbell, etc. So you think about these concepts of like manna from heaven or something like that. That's the impression that I'm getting with with fairy and fairy food. It says consequences of eating fairy food. One of the most common themes is that the idea of eating fairy food binds a person to the fairy world. I think that makes sense. It's almost like when a deer gets separated from its pack, it becomes tainted, and sometimes the pack won't let it back in. If you're a human and you expose yourself to the magical realm, you might no longer be wanted as a human, and you're stuck between that and the fairy realm. It says the human may become enchanted or lose track of time. So we're talking about a different reality. We're talking about a different scope of measuring time and space. It's dimensional. You know what I mean? And I think that's interesting too. When you say it's another realm where fairies may come from a different realm, we're not talking about the afterlife. You know, we're talking about something beyond. I don't want to use scientific terms to describe it, but I think the word realm is a better descriptor than another dimension or anything like that. So it really is, it's something beyond comprehension, right? You know,
Yep.
it's just, when in reality, years or even centuries may have gone by in the human world. True. Upon return, true, fact check. Upon returning, they may find that everyone they knew has long since passed away. Yep. And also, it says you'll lose connection to the human world, like what I was saying. So when you eat fairy food, I think once you ascribe that magical essence to yourself, you're kind of taking a step that you can't go back from. And that's actually a popular concept. Some people like to say at the end of the last Lord of the Rings movie, when Frodo and don't name check me on these, who's the wizard, Gandalf, they all go on a boat and
Vader.
yeah, exactly. That supposedly is the end of magic in that realm. We're now going to return to a world because Gandalf's leaving and Frodo's leaving. We're no longer living in a fantastical, adventurous world. It's now going to be more normal and human. And that's kind of the same way when you're leaving that human realm for a fairy world or a magical existence. You're kind of putting the secular kind of objective human physical world behind you. And then that kind of ties into the last part. It says becoming part of fairy magic. This is a byproduct of eating fairy food. The food offered by fairies is often enchanted, containing powerful magic that can alter a human state of being. It's funny. You could talk about like maybe this is some sort of explanation for mushroom hallucinogenics, which is a cheap out because people like to say that about a lot of different magical practices that have gone through myth. I think that's an excuse.
It's like some guy like just smokes weed once, like, whoa, is this magic?
It's like,
I'm in a
you
different realm,
ingested a
dude.
drug. Yeah, exactly. You know, it does remind me. I dated this girl one time years ago who said, "Have you ever done DMT?" And I'm like, "No, I don't think I'd want to do that. It's just not my thing." And she's like, "Yeah, I heard that if you do DMT, you can go to a magical realm where there's these gnomes and they're really good at sex." Sex with them, and she said it's the best sex you've ever had in your life. And I'm like, is she trying to tell me that she's had sex with the fifth dimensional gnome figure that she took DMT to see? Like, what is she trying to tell me
She's
right
trying to
now?
open up the relationship, but only to higher dimensional beings, dude.
Yeah, imagine you're in a throuple with an interdimensional gnome. That would be terrible. So,
But I have something to add on to that.
Yeah.
So you brought up the end of Lord of the Rings, and sort of along the same lines. What I heard about fairy food is that fairy food is so good, it's beyond anything you could ever imagine in the human world, that once you have it, you're gonna want fairy food again for the rest of your entire life. But you can't have it, and you're gonna be so depressed that you're gonna take your own life because it's gonna be beyond the scope of what the human mind could imagine. You know?
Once you've experienced that, you can't go back to the normal world. So, yeah, one last thing on these, and this is what I thought was interesting when it first came up, is you talk about fairy rings, like a circle of mushrooms. And there are also fairy circles, elves rings, pixie rings. So these are like kind of identifiers for them. And it says they're associated with the fairy world and believed to be places of magical activity. So I like this phrase, dance of the fairies. The most common belief is that fairy rings are the result of fairies dancing in a circle during their nighttime gathering. I love that whimsy, you know, that myth. And it's just like they're celebratory. They like have human aspects, but it's otherworldly human aspects. They probably don't celebrate in the same way we do. It's like not mocking, it's just a different activity the way that they do it. It's like ritualistic, you know. The mushrooms go where their feet have touched the ground. Okay, so maybe this is playing into mushrooms and hallucinogenic trips. The rings mark the boundary of their dance floor. Okay, and then some say these rings are a gateway to the other world, stepping a fairy to transport a person to the other realm. I love this. This is so interesting to me. And another one is another common belief is that a person steps into a fairy ring, they might become trapped in the fairies' dance. Okay, so you're almost like you said, you're subject to whatever they're doing. You're like a chicken in a frat house, right? And it says also fairy rings were sometimes seen as places to be avoided because they also be used for protection. And some cultures would believe that standing within a fairy ring during certain times, such as the summer solstice, okay, so there's a seasonal aspect to it too in the myth, can grant protection or wish. However, this is often considered risky, attract the fairies' attention in a negative way. So I do like that. There's some superstition around it, and they have some rituals, and that further feeds into the explanation for their myth and maybe how it informs human activity. Maybe it has to do with exploration. Maybe it just has to do with the magical feeling of being in the woods, in an unexplored woods, and foraging, etc. So yeah, that's cool.
It must be this is just stupid thought, but like, it must be kind of cool to be the guy that just explains stuff back in the medieval times or the ancient times. Like, imagine the image of like just some group of people like walking across the forest, and they're like, "Whoa, there's a ring of mushrooms. What do you think, guy who explains everything?" And the guy's like, "Those? Oh, it's a portal to another dimension." Yeah.
Yeah, well, we used to, it's a little bit Jungian, but there used to be, before agrarianism, if that's even the term for it, changed the shape of society, every village had a shaman, and shaman were the wise men. And the shaman would, I don't even want to say hallucinate, but they would offer their interpretations of their visions, and this would guide tribes, and guide tribes and clans, and that's why you end up with these interesting stories about places in the forest, or fae, or fairies, or who knows. So it looks like there's some more superstitions around them, though.
There are. So there's some superstitions and practices that are entwined with fairies, and in folklore, fairies are certain times depicted as capricious and unpredictable beings who can bring misfortune and harm to people that cross their paths. So to protect against certain unwanted fairy influence, various cultures have developed various practices and rituals that they believe will ward off or appease the fairies. And some of the most common protective measures are, the first one being iron. So iron is widely recognized as one of the most one of the most widely recognized materials for protection against fairies. It's believed that fairies are repelled by iron and cannot bear or touch or cross it. So people would carry iron objects such as nails, horseshoes, or knives to protect themselves against from fairies. And iron tools were often placed against doorways or windows to prevent fairies from entering their home or stealing infants. And I'm going to go big brain mode for a second here. I think if you look behind the allegory, you could attribute iron to human industry and the rise of technology. And if you look at human technology, that's sort of like antithetical to what fairies are. Fairies are very aligned with nature. They're not really supposed to develop machines or tools to work with stuff. So it makes sense why iron would ward off fairies. Does it sort of make sense?
Because it's a very earthly material.
It's because it's a material associated with creation of technology, with industry and all that stuff. Am I reaching too forward?
War.
You see exactly, yeah, with war.
Yeah.
You get the iron swords, you get iron machinery, all that stuff. But a second one is salt. So salt is considered a purifying substance with the power to repel evil spirits, including fairies. In many European traditions, salt was sprinkled around the home or in a circle around a person to create a protective barrier. So if you sprinkle salt on windowsills, doorways, and the thresholds of households, this was believed to be able to keep out fairies from inside. And some people have even carried a small pouch of salt with them for personal protection.
I think there's a lot of historical superstition around salt. So think about, isn't there that old Roman one where it's like you throw salt over your left shoulder or something
That's true,
if you don't
yeah.
want bad luck after it happens? And I think salt has something to do with hexing circles and part of spells. Again, obviously it's a I don't know it's not a condiment. That's not the term for it, but it's an old earthly material that's been around for as long as human beings have. So I can understand
I
why
always
its
thought the thing with
properties
salt.
are.
I always thought the thing with salt was from the Bible, where God turns Lot's wife into a pillar of salt, right?
Yes. Yeah. She
So maybe
was salty.
that's maybe that's a symbol, like saying God's wrath is coming for you if you do evil unto me. You know, who knows? But
Well, shouldn't have turned
third
one.
That's true. She stupid dumb woman. Third one is
redundant statement.
Third one is the four-leaf clover, which I think all of us have heard before. You know, four-leaf clovers are considered symbols of good luck and are believed to offer protection against fairies and other malevolent beings. So if you carry a four-leaf clover or place one in a child's crib, that was thought to be enough to protect against a fairy mischief or having the child be replaced by a changeling.
Yeah, that must be some sort of Celtic Irish influence, which I must rebuke as someone who is partially Italian. But yeah, I can understand where that may have found its way into the folklore at some point.
This is the funniest one. So bread and crumbs. So apparently bread,
Hansel and Gretel. I don't know.
Especially stale or leftover bread, was often left out of the houses for fairies as an offering to appease them and avoid their wrath. It's so funny to think like they just have this magical food that's beyond anything else, but then they want your stale bread. Okay, cool. So if you place a small piece of bread or scatter breadcrumbs around the house or at the edge of a fairy ring, this was believed to be enough to keep fairies satisfied and prevent them from causing trouble. I think maybe it's like human food is so disgusting to them that they don't want to cross the barrier. Maybe that's
No, I think it's more of a it's the thought that counts. You're making a gesture to show that you respect fairies, so they see that and be like, at least this disgusting utilitarian human can acknowledge my existence and offers
actually
what pitiable food he has.
That's
for
true.
me.
That's like the using the chicken in a fried house analogy. That's like if the chicken came up to a fried house and gave it some corn, everyone would be like, "Oh, you gave it some corn, thank you."
Yeah, exactly. Or like when you like feeding a squirrel for a while. I saw a video of it online, and one time the squirrel came back and like dropped her off a cookie that it found in a trash can or something. You know, she's definitely not going to eat that cookie, but it is the thought that counts. Absolutely. So, I'll just go on real quick. So, again, I like two things, right? I like the mythical elements of fairies, mainly because humanity used to be informed by myth. To this day, we still are, but in a more muted way. And I think it's led to more nihilism and existentialism and emptiness in man's life. He used to not feel that way because he found purpose not through fulfilling life duty and obligations. It's more he was in touch with his mystical side. He was able to imagine. He was able to be informed by folklore that gave him a deeper presence in his homeland, about his culture. And it was a lot more fulfilling when we were guided by our unconscious mind in time. So I don't need evidence of fairies being real. I think the concept of them is really enthralling, because when you have folklore that runs this deep and then it's cemented in our psyches forever through Americana at Disney, so we'll never forget. But then when you look through and read more into their past, it's a lot more than that. It usually is. A lot of these fairy tales aren't simple. You know what I mean? There's a lot that goes into it. There's three different. There's will-o'-wisp. They all come from different places and different cultures. Why is that? You know, it's just where did it originate? I think that's interesting. But I didn't want to bring it up at the beginning because it's a little long-winded, and I'll speed through it here. But Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was an early spiritualist / author who was doing some investigation into the existence of fairies. So It's a Googleable offense. So when you have the chance, look up the Cottingley Faeries, okay? And these are pictures that were made in the 20s of these two women in their garden in England. They were a little bit younger, and it just showed, like, now it's like I can tell this is photoshopped because no, these pictures are from the 20s, and it's just the most ham-fisted fairy iconography you'll ever see in your life. It's just like they're clearly outlined, they've been superimposed somehow, and they're like dancing with their little lutes, in front of this girl with her like palms up against her face, like looking whimsically at these fairies, and they were passed around as real. And Arthur Conan Doyle investigated and said, yeah, these are legit. This is the real deal. Look at these fairies. It's like, I think you just want to believe in fairies. And that's the part that bothers me the most. I don't need evidence of any of these myths. I can believe and enjoy the myths. You only live one time. Why not think, yeah, maybe there's something to this folklore, this myth, why humans thought this way. If anything, it was to help them better to understand themselves, and saying, like, what are you learning when you say, well, fairies aren't real? So it's like, okay, well, what's the myth behind them? How do they inform what we are as human beings? But I want everyone to go. Yeah,
that's a really good point, because you're talking about adults, but think about that from the child's perspective. Like, are children even being introduced to any form of mysticism at all these days? I don't think they are. And I feel like they're being robbed of that. Like, it used to be nicer when you could just tell kids, like, yeah, like, this thing happens for some unexplainable reason, but it adds character, it adds mystery to the world, and I think kids need that sort of mystery to grow up well-adjusted,
Well, when you're in touch with your creative subconscious mind, that's something that's able to inform your conscious mind. So you could be better at sales, you could be better at public speaking. These important life skills could better be informed when you're more in touch with myth and what it means to be man on a broader scale, instead of in a objective, introspective kind of way that you think the world is supposed to act as. You know what I mean? So it's at the the thing that I like the most about the story, and you would definitely have the pictures on the screen at this point, so you guys should look at them and then Google more of the story at some point. So these pictures were taken in the 20s. In 1983, the cousins admitted in an article published in the magazine The Unexplained that the photographs had been faked. So these bitches waited 60 years, and then they finally said on their deathbed, first off, we all knew they were fake for about the last 50 years, and they finally went, those fairy pictures, they were fake. Oh, I feel better that I got this off my chest. And everyone's like, yeah, we know. Like, what are you talking about?
This is the equivalent of, like, if, like, in 20 years when John Travolta dies, he's going to be like, guys, I have a secret. I was gay the whole time. And everyone's like, yeah, we know, dude.
Yeah, it's all good. Don't worry about it. People have been fine with that for quite some time. So, all right, bring us home.
But yeah, that's our take on fairies. A little bit of a callback, something more mystical. But yeah, if you guys like this, give us a like on the thing. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you guys have any ideas for future episodes, give us a comment down below.
Yep. All right, I'm gonna go put out some bread and find myself a hot fairy. I'll talk to you guys later.